Hello friends. What if Naruto's journey was taking an unexpected turn, leading him toward a future unlike anything the shinobi world had ever seen? Welcome to Part 3, where powerful bonds, hidden secrets, and new challenges begin to shape Naruto's destiny. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's get started. It was time. The three of them headed out towards the land of waves after their requests for leave were authorized. The Hokage and the village council were only too happy to give Kushina the leave she asked for, as she had become far more aggressive and antagonistic towards the villagers since Naruto's disappearance. Any time the woman heard so much as a derogatory comment about Naruto, she didn't just beat them, she maimed them, sometimes using her nodashi. Man, woman, didn't matter. Even fresh genin weren't spared her wrath when they were heard talking. As using the nodashi didn't seem to stop people from talking badly about her Naruto, Kushina began to forego clean blades and started using serrated edges instead. The end result was a village with an unusually high number of citizens sporting horrible disfigurements. To complicate the situation even further, with the evidence that they knew Kushina had in her possession, they couldn't go to the fire daimyo or they would be the only ones who would actually be charged with any crimes and sent to prison, while Kushina would likely walk away from the encounter not only scot-free, but possibly with the daimyo's full endorsement to enact whatever justice she saw fit with regards to her son's abuse at their hands. Disfigurements would be the least of their worries. Then, if that ever happened, there would be a very sudden, very sharp decline in the village's population. They had all packed and sealed their luggage and personals into scrolls and were now leaving the village through the main gates. The moment they left the gates, they took to the trees and made their way to Wave Country at top speed. Each of them had varying feelings and thoughts about both what they left behind for now and the upcoming encounter that they would soon have with Naruto. Mikoto had long since given up on actively pursuing open communication with Sasuke, seeing that it only served to irritate him more than anything else. She left him with an open door, a door that he sometimes took advantage of, as he did love his mother, but he would walk through that door less and less. Sasuke Uchiha was a loner in the truest sense of the word, and as much as it hurt Mikoto to see her youngest behave in such a way, she also knew that if this was who he chose to become, there was nothing she could do to dissuade him anymore. It was up to life to knock him down and teach him the hard way, now. On the other hand, she couldn't wait to see her Naru-kun once more. Was he really 17 years old biologically, like he claimed to be in his letter? He certainly seemed to communicate with the maturity of a man and not a child. He always had a striking face, even as a child, so what did he look like now? She couldn't help but lick her lips unconsciously as she smiled, eagerly looking forward to their upcoming rendezvous. Tsunade's feelings were just as optimistic as Mikoto's were. Aside from being able to meet the young man that she'd been getting to know through exchanging letters, she was also excited for the chance just to go on a vacation after so long. She'd trained Shizune up to the point where she could run the hospital by herself. Tsunade didn't technically need to even be there anymore. Her only regret about the situation was that they couldn't bring Shizune with them. As it turned out, Shizune had begun to develop quite the crush on the boy that the other three were in contact with, just through the content of his letters alone. He seemed genuine, compassionate and truly caring, qualities that Shizune really desired in a man. In addition to meeting her godson and getting to know him, it would also be a chance for her to maybe plant seeds in Naruto's mind about a potential romance with her lovely niece. Tsunade also couldn't help the smile that crossed her face at the possibilities of getting Shizune the kind of man that she deserved. Kushina, despite looking forward to seeing her former son, was having a much more difficult time than her two companions. She was happy about the prospect of seeing Naruto once more and hopeful about her chances of being able to reconnect with him and start over, but she was also terrified. What if he rejected her? What if she had done too much for him to ever be able to let go and give the two of them a fresh start? Even knowing what she now knew, could she really understand just how much she had hurt him? She knew on some level that Naruto had barely scratched the surface behind what she and their former family had put him through, but could she even handle knowing the whole truth behind the pain she'd caused him? There was also the dilemma about her mental image of him. Last year, he was a 12-year-old boy, and that was the most current image she had of him in her head. She'd had so much to think on in the last year and a half. In that time, she had realized some hard truths about the family that he had to escape from. Even though she planned on providing him with a place to stay after being disinherited, why would he even want to stay in a home where he wasn't loved? She couldn't ever remember seeing him smiling or happy. Mikoto, Asuma and the Ichirakus had on many occasions, they had told her so, but he was never happy when he had been around her. She knew it was her fault, she'd never done anything to induce a smile from him. The only things she could remember ever seeing in his eyes were heartache, fear and rage. Another factor to consider was that if Naruto's letter was to be believed, then 5.5 years had passed for him, not the 1.5 that the rest of them lived. That could make things easier or harder. It could make it easier in that when someone works through their anger and hurt, healing does take place over time. It could make it harder in that he had more time to decide to put any thoughts of returning to his family behind him, never to look back. Ironically, she concluded that only time would tell what time had done to him. She was brought out of her reminiscence by a soft hand on her shoulder. She turned to see that it was Mikoto who had placed the hand on her shoulder. She gave the redhead a reassuring smile, as if to tell her that everything was going to be alright. Kushina gave a weak smile in gratitude to her friend before they once more faced forward. She also noticed the wetness on her face, telling her that she must have started crying as she thought about the terrible things she'd done. There was nothing more to do about that. All she could do now is love Naruto and show him that she wouldn't even think of doing anything like that ever again. It only took them 3 hours to reach Wave at the pace they were setting. Once they reached the coast, they arrived at the head of the Great Naruto Bridge. Even more interesting were the two painted faces at the entry gateway, both of Naruto's, but very different. One had the black hair and blue eyes that they all knew, where the other had spiky blonde hair with bluish-green eyes. Both of them were smiling wide, the black-haired one grinning with a happy twinkle, the blonde one grinning not quite as widely and winking. Both of them showed the visage of a truly benevolent man. Wow, they got Naruto's smile down perfectly. Mikoto remarked, admiring the work. Kushina simply looked at both smiling faces in wonder, so this is what his smile looks like. He looks so happy. If I had only seen such an expression on his face even once, I would have completely melted and forgotten any anger I ever had towards him. Kushina's face slowly morphed into a sad yet proud smile as she shed a single tear. Tsunade looked at Naruto's face and at Kushina before a smile spread across her own face. She was happy for Kushina, for the chance that she was getting to reconnect with Naruto, even if it couldn't be as a parent to a child. She was also quite happy for her own chance to finally get to know him. They were so close. If Naruto had kept to his word and to his plans, then he was only a few hundred short yards away. Kushina was the first to take off running, weaving her way through the traffic on the bridge at near breakneck speeds. Her only goal was to find her Naruto, everything else was forgotten. Mikoto and Tsunade both giggled softly at their dear friend's impetuous and excited impatience before following her in. They reached the other side of the bridge and noticed that it opened into a square. In the middle of the square was a statue of Naruto, standing tall and proud with his feet shoulder-width apart, his tail sprouting out behind him and upward as if it was wagging. His arms were at his sides, bent at the elbows with clenched fists, and a fierce, focused, determined grimace on his face. He was much more muscular than they remembered him being, and he really did look older as well. At the base of the statue was an engraved plaque with an inscription, which all three of them chose to inspect more closely. Naruto, Wave Country's greatest hero. He gave us hope when we were hopeless. He gave us strength when we were weak. He gave us courage when we were afraid. Most of all, he gave us freedom when we were enslaved by Gato's tyranny. His example and his generosity will be remembered by Wave's people for all time. All of their eyes went wide as they read the inscription, Kushina and Tsunade with shock, Mikoto with pride and admiration. It had been Naruto who had freed this country from Gato. Naruto was the one responsible for the prosperity that these people were enjoying. Tsunade and Kushina would never have guessed that Naruto would be capable of something like this. They looked at Mikoto, who just seemed to have a knowing smile. She certainly didn't look surprised. "Good for you, Naruto," Mikoto praised quietly, as though she expected Naruto to pull something like this off. Kushina and Tsunade chose to hold their peace for now. They wouldn't have known what to say anyway. They continued on, taking to the rooftops in their search for the young man they had come here to meet and spend time with. They continued to leap through the village, garnering the attention of many of the villagers below. They ignored the stairs, focusing solely on catching sight of their target. Surprisingly enough, it was Kushina who saw him first. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw a young man, maybe 6 feet in height roughly, was walking down the street below with his back to her. She didn't recognize the outfit that he had on, a simple off-white sleeveless high-top tied closed with a black belt, and wearing dark blue GI pants tucked into black boots, but she would recognize that hair anywhere. As he walked, men greeted him in a very friendly manner, while women would gush at him. He would simply wave at them while continuing on his way. Kushina jumped down to the street a few yards behind him and cried out, "Naruto." He stopped, and after a few moments, he slowly turned around. There it was, the whisker-marked face adorned with electric blue eyes, which were now gazing upon Kushina Uzumaki in surprise and more than a little apprehension. He didn't even notice Mikoto and Tsunade as they jumped down behind her. "Naruto!" Kushina cried out even louder as she ran to him. He flinched and raised his hand in a defensive reflex as she charged him. Kushina ignored the flinch and stopped the moment she was in arm's reach, bringing her hands up and placing them all over his body, as though feeling him to make sure he was real. She continued her frantic exploration of Naruto's upper arms and chest while flitting her gaze this way and that all over his body, her expression just as frantic as her movements. She eventually reached his face, placing a hand on each cheek, caressing them with her thumbs before rubbing the skin of his face down to his neck. A few tears began to escape her eyes as she continued her probing. She eventually moved down to his waist. Naruto tensed up, knowing what she was looking for, but to his surprise, when she lifted the hem of his top to feel for his tail, she was surprisingly gentle when she touched it. She caressed his tail gingerly, as if to just make sure it was still there. Satisfied that he was really standing before her, her voice broke as she looked up to his face and said, "Kami, it is you." She immediately threw herself into him and started sobbing and wailing loudly into his chest, soaking his GI while she threw her arms around him, clinging to him as though he was her very lifeline. She tried speaking, but her words were simply unintelligible. She allowed her legs to collapse, dropping to her knees and sliding down his body. She was now crying into his stomach, while still uttering words that were incomprehensible through her tears. Naruto just looked around, bewildered. It was then that he noticed Mikoto and Tsunade. Tsunade regarded him with a warm, affectionate smile, while Mikoto was both smiling and crying at the same time. She simply nodded at him, and he knew what she was telling him to do. Naruto knelt down to one knee while maintaining Kushina's grip on him, and wrapped his own arms around the woman. Kushina, feeling this, clung to Naruto even more tightly and began to cry even louder. She pulled her face out of his chest and rested her chin on his shoulder, bringing one of her arms behind his neck and holding him to her by the back of his head. I'm so sorry, she kept repeating to him over and over as she got quieter, her energy leaving her upon having cried so hard. I know, Naruto repeated in response to every apology she gave him, sliding his own hand up to the back of her head and holding her to himself just as gently as she was. His voice, it's so much deeper than before, were the thoughts of both Kushina and Mikoto as Naruto let the woman he once called his mother cry in his arms. Naruto moved to let go of Kushina, but stopped when she cried out, "No," and clung to him even more tightly. When he looked at her in confusion, she explained herself, "Please, just hold me for a few more minutes. I don't want you to let me go yet, and I don't want to let you go, either." Naruto didn't fully understand her request, but nonetheless acquiesced with a nod. Kushina leaned into him once more as he gently tightened his hold on her. He felt her hands roaming his back and coming around his chest, just rubbing both clothing and skin. He also couldn't help but notice the feel of her womanly assets against his form. It was something that he'd never paid attention to before when receiving a hug from a woman. His body began to react when she started becoming more affectionate with him. She kissed his face several times, and he twice caught her licking her lips after kissing him. She also buried her face into his chest or into his hair several times, inhaling deeply as if to take in his body's smell. What is she doing? Naruto wondered, confused about her actions, though he made no move to stop her. Eventually, she pulled back a few inches and brought both of her hands into his hair, gently strumming her fingers through it while also clenching her hands in it as well. She did this while pulling his head down towards hers and touching her forehead to her own. Mikoto and Tsunade both noted the confusion on Naruto's face, as did Kushina. Kushina was still shedding tears, though she wasn't crying vocally anymore. Seeing his confusion, she explained herself once again. I'm sorry, this must be rather strange to you. Naruto nodded in agreement before she continued. This helps me get to know you, that's all. Hun? Naruto asked, no less confused than he was before. What she means, Naru-kun, Mikoto elaborated with a smile and drawing his attention towards her, is that she's very sensuous. This is one of the ways in which she can familiarize herself with you. She learns through her senses, much the same way that you do through your body. What you feel like, your scent, even how you taste, if she can get away with it, these are things that stand out to her about people. This is her first step in really trying to get to know you. Naruto looked back at Kushina, who confirmed Mikoto's explanation with a nod. She then brought her hands from his hair to his face and started caressing his cheeks once more, this time using the whole of each hand instead of just her thumbs. The expression on her face was still one of desperation, though it was milder now. Naruto simply smiled softly, closed his eyes and let her go. Kushina responded in kind, relinquishing her hold on him. She sighed regretfully when he turned his attention to Tsunade and Mikoto. Mikoto looked at Tsunade and nodded. Tsunade smiled at Naruto and approached him, opening her arms to hug him. Naruto smiled in turn and moved towards her, gently pulling her into his arms as they neared each other. Tsunade moaned out happily as Naruto held her. They separated after a few moments and pulled back, Naruto's hands coming to rest on Tsunade's shoulders, while Tsunade's hands came up to Naruto's face. Naruto could see great affection towards him in her eyes, while he looked at her with a contented, warm smile. Tsunade's eyes began to well up ever so slightly, the salty liquid giving an additional gleam to her eyes. It's so great to finally meet you, Naruto-kun, Tsunade greeted him with an affectionate smile. You too, Tsunade-chan. Tsunade's eyes widened slightly at his use of the affectionate suffix, you too. Naruto pulled her into a warm hug once more, which Tsunade returned. Tsunade brought a hand up to his cheek, bringing his face towards hers and planting a lingering kiss on his other cheek. She released him once she'd pulled away from her kiss. She caressed the spot where she'd just kissed him with her fingers. Once more, he couldn't help but notice the feel of a woman's breasts pressed into him, but this time he also noticed a feminine, flowery scent. His body began to betray him once more, but his thoughts were brought back to the present by the sound of Tsunade's voice. I've been looking forward to getting to really know you for such a long time now, Tsunade said endearingly, and we've all been counting the minutes since we made plans to come here. I've been geared about this time, myself. Naruto closed his eyes and laughed softly before continuing. It's funny, though, other than spending time with all of you, I don't think I'm gonna know what to do with myself. All I ever really do is train and travel around looking for more training. Tsunade giggled at this as she responded, well, I'm sure we can figure all that out. We'll have a good couple of months together, after all. Naruto smiled good-naturedly as he let her go. He then turned his attention to Mikoto, and his own eyes began to well. His smile also changed, becoming warm, loving and sad. He slowly approached the beautiful woman, looking at her as though for the very first time. This woman, this radiant, beautiful woman, with as lovely a form as he had ever seen, a form rivaled only by the two women with her, his Miko-chan. As Naruto began his tentative approach, Mikoto's eyes also began to well as her smile fell into an overwhelmed frown. Sobs began to escape her throat as everything and everyone else around her faded away, leaving only her and Naruto. She didn't know what to feel upon seeing him, especially taking note of how he was looking at her, as though she was his very world. He was a mere boy a year and a half ago, but now, here he is, a full-grown man. She felt ecstatic joy, overwhelming sadness and physical arousal all at once. She ran towards him and, much like Kushina, she sobbed into his chest and wrapped his arms around his neck. Naruto allowed the tears to fall from his eyes, the joy he was experiencing upon seeing this precious creature beyond language's ability to explain. After a few moments of being held by him, in a sudden moment of impulse or clarity, she pulled her face out of his chest and slammed her lips right into his, shoving her tongue into his mouth, sobbing even while kissing him. Naruto was stunned, but allowed his instincts to take over as his own tongue danced with hers on its own accord. He could do nothing but gape with wide eyes while doing this, Kushina and Tsunade gaping just as he was at the advances of their friend towards this young man. Gaping still, Naruto gently placed his hands on Mikoto's waist and held her in place gently. After she pulled away, she looked once more into his eyes, tears still flowing freely down her face. Naruto's stunned gape never left his face, bringing a laugh out of Mikoto, who gently lifted her fingers to his chin and closed his mouth for him. "We don't want anything flying in there, now, do we?" she asked with a laugh. Naruto shook his head and brought himself back to the present before laughing sheepishly and scratching the back of his head. Mikoto separated from him and took one step back, while Tsunade and Kushina both strode forward and stopped by their friend. "So," Naruto began somewhat awkwardly, "are any of you hungry?" Lunch had been interesting for some and awkward for others. Naruto was much more talkative with Mikoto and Tsunade, while he and Kushina both seemed nervous about talking to each other. Kushina didn't really know how she could enter the conversation that Naruto was having with the others, and Naruto didn't know what to say to Kushina at all. He didn't even know how to interact with her or what to expect, but he did try to include her when he could by commenting on the many different dishes she'd sent to him on a daily basis or on how his training was going with the material she had sent him, though he always had a somewhat nervous smile on his face when talking to her. She was able to sense his unease and opted mostly to watch and observe him, speaking only when spoken to. Naruto had informed them all, with regret in his voice towards Mikoto, of his budding relationship with Haku Mikoto. He was surprised that none of them reacted. Tsunade then explained to him that as the sole remaining known male of the Uzumaki clan, he had certain privileges that were universally recognized in every nation. One such privilege was the taking of multiple wives in order to expand the clan's numbers very quickly to once again make them strong. Once he heard this, he breathed a sigh of relief before gaping in panic and lamenting over how he would have no idea about how to keep so many different wives happy and satisfied, as well as away from each other's throats. Kushina, Mikoto and Tsunade all laughed at Naruto's reaction, though they all found it to be quite insightful of Naruto that he could see that potential challenge before it even occurred. Not too long afterwards, Naruto led the three to the place where they would stay for the week before their cruise liner would leave from Part-3's family inn. Once he had freed Wave from Gato, Tazuna and his family renovated their home and expanded it, turning it into a rather large and well-to-do inn. It was no five-star hotel, but it was very pleasant and cozy, with warm fires burning in the hearth of the lobby dining area and the aromas and tastes of home-cooked meals at the appropriate times. It was a place of family and camaraderie. Tazuna, Kaiza, Tsunami and Inari were all there to greet Naruto and his entourage upon their arrival. Naruto introduced the three of them to the family, though when they learned Kushina's name, all of their eyes narrowed and their gazes prolonged on her, as if studying her. Kaiza, Tazuna and Inari all showed Naruto, Tsunade and Mikoto to their rooms. Kushina had been about to follow them before being stopped by Tsunami's voice. Kushina-san, a moment, please. She told the redhead somewhat seriously before gesturing for Kushina to follow her. Kushina nodded and followed the raven-haired beauty who looked so similar to Mikoto that they could have been relatives. The Tsunami led her into the back office and closed the door once Kushina was in the room. Turning to Kushina, she began, "Let me be candid with you. All of my family knows exactly what you and the rest of Naruto's family did to him before he left Konoha." Kushina simply listened without so much as flinching or adopting any kind of defensive posture, and we were all very, very angry about it. When Naruto told us that you would be coming here, we all wanted to string you up and skin you alive, but he informed us that you've changed, and that through your letters to him and gifts to him, you've done a lot to prove that to him. Kushina simply nodded in acknowledgement that she was listening before Tsunami continued, "But there's something I want you to understand." Tsunami's face became grim, her gaze turning harder than steel. "We love Naruto, here. We will not suffer any harm coming to him, and we will not let anyone hurt him or break his heart, especially not you. We will have our eye on you, and if we deem it necessary, we will take steps to protect Naruto from you. We won't let you do what you did to him again, not under my roof. Are we clear?" "Yes," Kushina replied with a nod and a small smile. Tsunami frowned at her answer in confusion. "That's it." "Yes, that's it," Kushina responded. "I'm glad that there are people who are as protective of him as you are. And you're right to be angry, because I wronged him horribly when he was still at home. Sadly, I was too blind and foolish to even realize what I was doing to him, and it took him escaping from us for me to wake up to it." Kushina straightened herself up and looked Tsunami dead in the eye. "I'm here because I want to make whatever amends I possibly can with him, nothing more. My actions were inexcusable, and I won't make any excuses for them. I shouldn't have been so blind and so stupid when he was still at home, and it was my fault that I allowed myself to become that way. So I'll gladly prove to you, to your family, and to anyone else I have to, that I have changed, and that I love Naruto. I'll do all I can to earn your trust just like I'll do all I can to earn his. Will you give me the chance to, Tsunami-san?" The Tsunami was floored by this woman. From what she'd heard from Naruto, this wasn't the same woman who had slapped him around or vented her anger out on him at every seeming opportunity that presented itself. Knowing that Naruto, having been the one to go through it all, was willing to give her a chance, she knew that she had no right to not do the same. Tsunami nodded. "Yes, Kushina-san. I will give you the chance, and so will the rest of my family. We'll do it because we know Naruto would want us to." And, Tsunami paused before looking her in the eye once more. "Thank you. Thank you for being so forthcoming, yourself. Of all the things I could have expected from you, taking ownership in this way certainly wasn't one of them." The Tsunami moved toward the door and opened it, turning to Kushina with a smile, that said, "Welcome to our home, Kushina-san." Tsunami then gestured for Kushina to follow her once more, with Kushina obliging. She led Kushina up the stairs to the third floor of the inn, then to the suite that she'd set Naruto and the girls up in, a 3-bedroom suite in the inn with its own living area and even its own balcony. Haku had just gotten back from Naruto's secret training ground where he along with Zabuza and herself were training kids to be future ninjas in Namikaze. As she began walking into the village she heard a woman shout, "Naruto." She quickly made her way to the origin of the voice, and what she saw next would shake her world. A red-haired woman was clinging onto Naruto like he was a lifeline, while he seemed to be comforting her. Another woman came up and hugged him for a minute or so, but nothing compared to what she saw this last woman do. The last woman, with black hair with black eyes, grabbed him into a warm embrace like they knew each other for years. Then, the woman did something Haku didn't expect. The woman kissed him, and he didn't seem to mind considering he didn't stop her from kissing him. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had thought of walking right up to the group and starting to raise hell, but she decided to get the answers her womanly pride demanded in her own subtle way. It had been 2 hours since Naruto, Kushina, Mikoto, and Tsunade decided to call it a night. Naruto himself was just about to fall asleep when he noticed the temperature drop several degrees as well as the feeling of a killing intent permeating the air. His training had allowed him to react quickly to the situation. He wasn't prepared to see Haku in the living room staring at him with tears running down her eyes and a cold expression on her face. Without a word, she lunged at him, and thanks to his training with instant transmission he was able to teleport Haku and him to a location where they could work out whatever problems were going on that caused Haku to do this. "Haku-chan, what are you doing? What's wrong, and why are you doing this?" asked Naruto, who was confused as to why Haku was acting like this. "HMPH, like you don't know. And don't even try to play dumb with me," she shouted with anger and sadness laced in her voice. "I know you were with other women. I saw you kiss that black-haired one, and I know that you're in the same room at the inn as all of them." His eyes widened as she said this. He began to say, "Haku-chan, give me a chance to expel." "Explain what? About how you've been timing me behind my back," she interrupted him furiously, "or how about the fact that you'd rather be with whores than me?" "Haku-chan." He wasn't able to say any more as she began attacking him. He dodged all of her attacks, both physical and elemental. He quickly used his superior speed and strength to bind her in a bear hug to where she couldn't escape. She began screaming, but after a few minutes she was reduced to sobbing. "Why?" she choked out between sobs. "Haku-chan, let me explain. Please," he said in a soft but firm tone. She gave no indication of acknowledging his request, so Naruto simply began to explain and relay all the information he learned today from who the women were to the CRA. After hearing him, her form relaxed quite a bit, which showed Naruto that she was willing to fully listen to what he was saying. He stayed with her, holding and comforting her till she was finally in a good mood. "Can I meet them?" she asked in a hushed tone. "Of course you can, first thing tomorrow," Naruto replied. After a few more minutes, Naruto took Haku to her room where he laid her down and created a shadow clone to stay with her for the night. Naruto then proceeded to go back to his couch in the suite that he was sleeping on. It was quiet and dark, just as one would expect in the watches of the late night, early morning. Midnight had passed over an hour ago, and Kushina simply couldn't fall asleep. She was troubled at how Naruto was keeping his distance from her. She understood completely why he would, but at the same time, she knew that if they didn't talk about this, Kushina's continued presence would really put a damper on everyone else's time away. To further complicate things, she wouldn't be able to earn the trust of Wave's people, either, not until she was able to establish even a small degree of trust from Naruto. Sighing in frustration, she got out of bed and went to her wardrobe to retrieve her silk robe in order to cover up the lingerie she was sleeping in. Once she tied her robe, she quietly left her bedroom and made her way towards the balcony. As she peered into the living room area, however, she noticed that Naruto wasn't asleep on the couch, and the sheets that he'd been using looked as though he'd just gotten out of them himself. She looked outwards toward the balcony through the sliding glass door and saw that he was standing outside, wearing only his pants and boots, his back to her as he was leaning against the railing overlooking the edge of the structure, his gaze seeming to peer out into the bay. The sliding glass door was open, and the cool night breeze was flowing in. Kushina made her way out the open sliding glass door and crept quietly towards the still form of the black-haired man that she could no longer call her son. If Naruto noticed her, he made no indication that he did. Once she reached him, she slid her arms around his front and hugged him from the back. Naruto didn't even stiffen or flinch, he simply sighed and hung his head slightly. "Can't sleep?" Kushina asked softly. "No," Naruto responded just a little above a whisper. "Me neither," Kushina responded, pausing for a few moments before continuing. "Naruto, does my being here bother you?" Naruto frowned in slight confusion, narrowing his eyes and turning his head back very slightly before asking, "What do you mean? Does it bother you that I'm here with Mikoto and Tsunade?" She closed her eyes and paused once more for just a moment before finishing her thought. "Feels like you don't want me here. At least, it feels like you don't want to talk to me." She pulled back slightly, allowing her hands to slide across his front towards his sides. I don't want you to be uncomfortable, Naruto. If you want, I can pack up and head back. You've got it wrong, Kushina, Naruto interrupted her, his voice just as soft as it had been. It's not that I don't want you here, or that I don't want to talk to you. It's just that, when I look at you, I just don't know what to say. He pushed himself off the railing and turned himself around to face her. I do want to talk to you, I just don't know where to start. Why not? Kushina asked in a patient and understanding manner. Naruto pressed his lips together and closed his eyes for a moment before opening them and gazing upon Kushina's face once more. He began with a sigh. I don't want to hurt your feelings with my answer. Don't worry about that, Kushina interrupted him softly. You said that we could start over, and I'm truly grateful that you're willing to give me a chance to do that. But I also know that given our past, it's just not that simple. I came here knowing that we would have some unfinished business that needs to be laid to rest. I'm ready to listen to anything you have to say. Naruto looked into her eyes to see if he could find any sign of deceit. What he saw surprised him. He couldn't ever remember seeing anything but anger and rage in those eyes, and a furious grimace on that face whenever it looked his way. In their place, he now saw patience, warmth and love. He also saw hopeful anticipation and an earnest eagerness to help him and to make their relationship whole once more, and failing that, to simply make it anew. You're right, he conceded with a nod and a weak smile, and, thank you. I'm trying to deal with this as best I can, but it's just that, every time I see your face, my head plays tricks on me. Kushina frowned in confusion, prompting Naruto to explain himself. I mean that whenever I look at you, flashes of what you looked like whenever you were angry with me seem to superimpose themselves on you in my mind. I feel like I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I can't feel the need to keep my guard up in case I'm attacked again. Does that make sense? Kushina closed her eyes as tears began to flow from them. Yes, it does. And I'm truly sorry that you have to deal with such a burden. But it's my burden to bear, Kushina, he interrupted, again softly, bringing his hands up and placing them on her shoulders. This isn't your problem. I know that what's done is done, and it can't be undone, but I can also see that you would never do those things now. Naruto-kun, she brought a hand around his side, rubbing up his chest and rested it on his face. It may be your burden to bear, but I am the one responsible for placing that burden on you. It's not a burden that you should have to bear, and if I can, I want to help lift that burden from you. Naruto simply stared at her, frowning in pained confusion as if not knowing what to do at that moment. Kushina simply smiled, the most loving smile he could ever imagine seeing on her face. Coupled with the regret and pain he could see in her eyes, pain over what she'd done to him, he felt the burden that he'd just described to her begin to lift, even if only slightly. He shed a single tear and smiled back in acceptance of what she had just given him, pulling her into an embrace. Kushina snaked both her arms around his neck and hugged him across his shoulders, planting a lingering kiss on the side of his face. After a few minutes of this, they both pulled back to regard each other again. Kushina studied Naruto intently, as if to see if he was still burdened. It was there, it wasn't as strong, but she could still see it. Bringing a hand up to his face once more and caressing his cheek, she offered warmly, you said that you couldn't talk to me because you didn't know where to start. Why don't we start by talking about how I've hurt you? Naruto tensed up at this. Kushina, noticing his tension, moved in to hold him once more, rubbing her hands across his back in an effort to calm him. Please, don't be afraid, Naruto-kun, Kushina reassured him, not noticing how she shortened his name in an affectionate way. I promise you I'll let you get it all out. I want you to be able to feel safe with me. It's not telling you about it that's the issue, Naruto explained, trying to keep his voice as even as he could. It's the idea of having to relive it all that terrifies me. Kushina abruptly pulled back and gave him a concerned frown. What do you mean? Well, what I mean is, Naruto paused as though trying to find the right words to convey his meaning. After a few moments, he continued, you know, it's probably best that I show you. Go ahead and get dressed, I'll take us somewhere that's a few miles away from here. Kushina's frown morphed into one of confusion before she raised a dubious eyebrow. After regarding him for a few minutes, she decided to take his word for it with a nod. Heading back inside, she went into her room, only to emerge a few moments later in some casual civilian gear. Naruto held out his arm to her and gestured for her to come to him. She did, and as she neared him, he wrapped his arm around her. She noticed that in an instant they were someplace completely different. There was no indication of any jutsu used. The only indicator that they had gone anywhere was the fact that their surroundings were suddenly different. Kushina would have thought it was a genjutsu, but unless Naruto hadn't been completely honest with her, the only genjutsu he had were the ones she sent him. Aside from that, there was no usage of chakra for the technique. Blinking a few times, she left Naruto's grasp and looked around before turning back to Naruto. What did you do? It's called instant transmission. As long as I've either been to the area, or I can sense something I want to go to, I can get there instantly. I've also trained with it so much that I haven't had the need to place my 4 and index fingers to initiate the technique. That's handy, Kushina commented with an impressed nod. I think so, Naruto responded with a knowing smile before his face became serious. Now, for the reason I brought you out here. I'm going to need you to stand back. Kushina nodded and took a few steps back, stopping only when Naruto indicated that she'd gone far enough. What happened next shocked Kushina, as she felt a sudden surge of power, the nature and magnitude of which was completely unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. Naruto began to glow with some kind of golden light, when suddenly, his hair became even spikier and began to stand up. His irises started to glow a strange green color, and his hair suddenly turned golden blonde. The golden glow around his body was now even more accentuated, as if his awesome power was taking physical form. She didn't even remember the Kyuubi feeling this powerful. "Wah, what is this?" Kushina asked in stunned awe. Naruto answered, even his voice seeming to radiate power now. "The reason I'm showing you this is because for what I'm about to tell you to make any sense, you need to understand that I'm not a human being. I never was. I am what is known as a Saiyan. I was genetically transformed into this when you were still pregnant with me. I still don't know all the particulars of it, but I do know that the Shinigami himself sealed the spirit and power of our distant ancestor, Son Goku, inside of me in order to train my abilities. It's why I was born with black hair and a tail. Right now, the form you're seeing is a Saiyan's form when he has ascended into the ranks of the Super Saiyans of legend. My power, speed, strength, durability, all have increased many times over. I'm quite literally powerful enough to destroy this entire planet if I chose to do so. Saiyans can also transform into Kyuubi-sized apes when there is a full moon out. Our eyes absorb the light that the moon reflects from the sun, which produces a chemical reaction within our tails that trigger the transformation. Kushina simply blinked in astonishment. Even the Kyuubi wasn't anywhere near this powerful. Given the power she could feel radiating off of him, she believed his claim. She couldn't do anything except nod in acknowledgement that she'd heard him. The reason I'm showing you this, Kushina, is because for a Saiyan to reach this level of power, he has to experience either a life or death situation where his only chance of survival is to push through to ascension, or he must become so enraged that he either pushes through his own physical and emotional limits to achieve this state, or completely lose his mind. Kushina nodded once again. What you need to understand, Kushina, is that the only way I could bring myself to become enraged enough to get to this level, he paused to make sure that he had her attention before finishing, was to remember and relive the things that you specifically put me through. Kushina gasped in shock, which turned into utter horror. She was the one person who had hurt him enough to bring enough rage into his heart that he could have possibly lost his mind to it. She knew she had hurt him. She knew she had hurt him in ways she might never know or understand, but the full weight of just what she had done to him was now pressing down upon her like an avalanche. She collapsed to her knees as she brought her hands to her mouth. Naruto noticed this and quickly moved towards her, kneeling down to make sure she was all right. She stared straight ahead blankly, muttering, I had no idea, Kami, what have I done? She began to shed tears once more, too shocked to even utter a sound while weeping. She brought her horrified gaze to Naruto's own. Seeing nothing but compassion and generosity in his eyes, she broke down completely, throwing herself into his chest and sobbing just as she had when she first saw him after so much time apart. I'm so sorry, I had no idea that I'd been such a monster. She sobbed out. Naruto once more put his arms around the woman, rubbing her back much the same way that she had rubbed his earlier. I know that, he acknowledged quietly, and I do believe that. If you didn't care, I know you wouldn't be here with me, now. He allowed her to once more cry herself out as she let it sink in just how badly she had hurt Naruto, even if she couldn't truly recall all of the things she had done. Despite how powerful she knew he was, she actually found the power he was emanating to be rather soothing, as though it came from a truly loving and warm soul whose only desire was to protect and to do all the good that he possibly could. After a few minutes of this, she regained control of herself before slowly pulling just far enough away so that she could look Naruto in the eye once more. Despite the fear and uncertainty he saw in her gaze, she said to him in a determined voice, Naruto-kun, I want you to tell me everything you remember. Now it was Naruto's turn to be stunned. Despite knowing that she had hurt him and driven him to further and greater rage than any other person alive, she was prepared to know exactly what it was that she did to drive him to that. He couldn't help but cast her a warning glance. Kushina-chan, are you sure you want me to do that? Are you sure you can handle knowing? She noticed the affectionate suffix but paid it no mind. It's not an issue of what I want, Naruto-kun. I need to know it all. If I'm going to repair or rebuild our relationship, I need to know exactly what I did in order to destroy it in the first place. Please, trust me. Tell me. Her requests were pleading in their tone and urgency, so as she had asked, Naruto told her everything. He told her about his first beating after he had just turned 3, when he had been beaten into unconsciousness and nearly killed. He still had no idea how he had survived, but he told her that she and the others hadn't even paid him any mind, despite the fact that he'd come home covered in blood and littered with cuts, and his arm and leg were both misshapen from being cleanly broken. He told her of the time when she'd berated and slapped him at Ichiraku's when he had beaten up the men who were trying to rape Ayame. He also told her about how he had felt when Naomi had been given the title of heiress of the clan, because they'd chosen not to even bother training him, and about how he felt like he never had parents. There were several other instances that he'd told her about, but those 3 were the ones that had struck her the hardest. As he recalled the events to her, they all came rushing back with a vengeance. It was almost as if she'd repressed them, or been made to repress them. She still couldn't believe that she had done those things, but what was even worse in her mind were the things she hadn't done. She hadn't been a mother to Naruto, not since he could walk or talk. She hadn't actively loved him, or given him any room in her heart left to be her child. Still on her knees, she immediately fell prostrate to the ground in front of Naruto, who couldn't help but flinch in surprise. She was kneeling before him and bowing her head to the ground in what he knew to be the most sincere display of humility that a person would give to another. I beg you, forgive me, Kushina said softly, tears breaking her voice yet again, please, forgive me. I have wronged you in ways that nobody who calls themselves human should ever wrong another, especially not when it's their child that they have committed such atrocities against. I know I will never deserve your forgiveness, but that's the reason I ask for it. I owe you a moral debt that I will never be able to repay. Please forgive me, so that we truly can start over. Please. She sobbed silently, never moving her head from the ground. After about a minute of this, Naruto moved toward her and knelt down himself. He placed his hands on both of hers, taking them in his own, and lifted her from the ground by her hands. As she looked at him, she saw his radiant smile, and his eyes looked as if his burden was now completely gone. There was nothing but forgiveness and acceptance of her in his eyes now. She smiled and sobbed, this time for joy. Naruto pulled her into another hug, which she returned gratefully and forcefully. This time, it was Naruto who kissed the side of her face. He whispered in her ear, "I do forgive you. And thank you. What you did here just now, being willing to acknowledge our past, all of it, and showing such humility and ownership toward it all, that took immense courage, and it could only come from a caring and loving heart." She sniffled in gratitude at his praise and compliments as he continued, "And I'm actually glad you're here with me. I'm just glad that I can finally get to know you as you truly are." Kushina's hug tightened in response to his words before she let him go. She stepped out of his embrace as he allowed it to drop. She suddenly began to study him even more, appraising him from head to toe. Naruto looked at her with a confused smile, but waited patiently for her to finish. "Naru-kun," she began, "how long can you maintain this form?" "Hun?" he asked in confusion before looking down at himself and realizing what she was talking about. "Oh, you mean my Super Saiyan form? Well, I can actually maintain it indefinitely right now, but I do like to be able to switch it off so that I can train in my base form. The stronger my base form, the stronger I am as a Super Saiyan, after all." "Well," Kushina responded, this time with a slight blush, "why don't you stay in this form for the rest of our vacation? You actually look strikingly handsome as you are right now." "Oh," he responded with a mildly embarrassed chuckle, "thank you." "Yeah," she breathed out with a smile before catching herself and adding, "Well, I guess we ought to be getting back, then, huh?" "Yeah, we probably should," he conceded. She moved towards him so that he could do his instant transmission trick that he did before. He was about to perform the technique before he stopped. Kushina looked up at him and noticed that he seemed to be in thought. A smile crept across his face before he looked down at her and said, "You know, I think I'll use an alternate form of transportation to get us back to our room." "Oh, what alternate form of transportation would that be?" Naruto stood behind her and placed both hands on her waist. The next thing Kushina knew, she was being lifted off the ground, higher and higher, and higher, into the air. She noticed that Naruto shifted position, holding one hand around her waist while positioning himself to her left. "You can fly," Kushina exclaimed, utterly astonished at the amazing feat that Naruto was actually performing solely for her benefit. "Yes, I can. I do it through the use of ki." Kushina couldn't find the word so she just shouted out, "Amazing." Naruto saw that she had the biggest grin he had ever seen on her face. He also found himself noticing just how nice her body felt, firm and well-muscled, yet still quite soft and feminine. Naruto took one of her hands in his free hand and used it to place her hand in the hand that he had just removed from her waist. She was now flying with him, holding his hand as they soared freely through the air. She noticed the light of the crescent moon reflecting off of the water that they were flying directly over. Naruto descended gently until they were just over the surface of the still waters. Kushina looked over at him, and he just smiled warmly in return. She turned her gaze to the water and extended a single finger into it, allowing her fingertip to create waves and ripples that spread outward from where her finger made contact with the water. After several minutes of this, Naruto took the opposite approach and took her high above the clouds, showing her the starry brilliance of a night sky that was untainted by artificial light. Kushina just took in the wondrous spectacle of nature that Naruto was now giving her the chance to enjoy, allowing herself to be dazzled at the sheer majesty of it all. Naruto then proceeds to fly over an area that wasn't cloudy at all, allowing the brightness of the moon and the night sky stars to illuminate lush jungles and majestic mountainous peaks, broken by the occasional waterfall. Kushina's breath had been taken away more and more by the magnificent sights Naruto was showing her. After he had spent the better part of an hour flying her around Wave Country and the neighboring islands, he finally flew back in the direction of the inn. As their balcony came into sight, Naruto pulled Kushina back in and picked her legs up in his free arm, flying her back down in a bridal carry. As they slowly descended, Kushina's gaze turned back to Naruto's face. It was adorned with a contented, peaceful smile, as though all was right with his world at that moment. What was a slight flush suddenly turned into a very strong one. Her breathing quickened and her heart suddenly began to start beating faster. Despite the idea of her feelings being morally wrong with regards to her son, at least biologically, she simply couldn't help herself. This amazing man, whose power was far beyond anything she'd ever known, was so gentle. He was so pure-hearted, and he was so willing, and ready, to forgive her, despite all she had done. And then there was his thoughtfulness towards her. Even in her broken spirits, he still lifted them. Even after telling her the hardest truths about herself she knew she would ever hear, he was still so gentle and careful with her. He didn't take advantage, he simply cared. And then, on top of that, taking her on this spectacular midnight flight, not because he wanted to show off, but because he knew she would be dazzled by it. Never had she known or even heard of a man with such a spirit of loving generosity. She felt him slow down as they approached the balcony, and after a few seconds, he landed softly. He placed her gently on her feet, her arms still wrapped around his neck, and her eyes glued to him in wide-eyed wonder. He slowly smiled at her, causing her to blink and return to her senses. She then stared back at him and asked breathlessly, "Why?" Naruto smiled with a raised eyebrow. "Why what? Why did you give me such an amazing gift by flying me around like that? I certainly didn't do anything to deserve something as wonderful as that, so, why? Why not?" Naruto asked back in response before continuing, "It was within my capability, and I knew that you would like it and appreciate it, so why wouldn't I want to do that for you?" Kushina just shook her head in utter disbelief. This man had just given her the single most amazing gift she would likely ever receive in her lifetime, and he was acting like it was no big deal. Looking into his eyes once more, she saw the compassionate warmth and affection that they radiated, even through the power that was quite evident in them. She gulped and swallowed before blurting out, "I don't care if you are my son." Without wasting any further time, she slammed her lips into his, forcing her tongue into his mouth much the same way Mikoto had done when they first arrived. Naruto's eyes went just as wide as they had when Mikoto had done the same, but this time, he managed to close his eyes and return the kiss being given to him. He snaked his arms around Kushina's lovely form as they shared their first kiss together. After they broke for air, Naruto told her breathlessly, "Actually, I'm not your son, biologically, as..." Kushina interrupted him with another passionate lip lock, breaking it again simply to say, "I still don't care." She separated from him and took his hand, leading him back into the suite and into her bedroom. She closed the door and looked him straight in the eye with a smile on her face. "You'll be sleeping in here with me tonight, and if the others have no objection, for the rest of this trip as well," she told him with a mischievous smile, leaving no room for debate. Feeling quite tired all of a sudden, he simply responded, "Well, yes, ma'am." Both of them stripped out of everything except their undergarments and got into the bed. Naruto fell asleep while holding Kushina, who was leaning into his side with one leg over his own, her head resting on his chest. Kushina now shared Naruto's contented, peaceful smile as they both gave into blissful slumber. That's it for part 3. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Naruto What If stories. And comment below, what do you think will happen next? See you in the next video.